Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. So here we are again with reviewing the worst and best books of the year. So I have a pretty extensive list. So I have 5 of the worst books that I read with an honorable mention, or a dishonorable mention I guess you would say, and I have 10 of the best books that I read with an honorable mention as well. So I really tried to narrow it down to the top 5, but there were just so many good books this year that I wanted to make sure that I called out. Not all of them are 5 stars, but they're books that I continually kept thinking about, and I just really enjoyed them. So first of all, I just want to give this as a disclaimer because I did get a little bit of hate on Instagram and TikTok. But I'm not going to apologize for having my worst reads of the year list. I always say that reading is subjective and these are my opinions only. I would never tell anyone to not go read a book, but these are books that I can't recommend to you. So I did get a comment on one of my short videos that I held up the book, either one of the best books or one of the worst books, and I did get a comment about, you know, how I shouldn't, you know, be telling people that it was on my worst list. I would never say anything terrible about an author. I'm not one of those booktubers who just rips people apart, but I'm also entitled to my opinions. So wanted to get that out of the way. Like I said, reading is subjective. These are only my opinions. Please, if you still want to go out and pick up these books, they might work for you. Absolutely. We're all going to have differing opinions. So having said that, let's get into my worst reads of 2021. So coming in at number 5 on my worst reads list is The Devil Makes 3 by Tori Bovalino. So this was actually a book that was on my most anticipated reads of the year. I was really super excited to get this, and as soon as it came out, I had it pre-ordered and was so excited to get into it. So just a quick overview of the synopsis. We're following a teenage girl who is at a boarding school or university. I believe she's in university, and she has a job at a library, and she inadvertently lets a devil or a demon out of an occult book, and her and another fellow that she meets at the university have to try to get this demon back in the book, but of course the demon is trying to trick them and do all kinds of things. So this synopsis sounded really good to me. I thought it was going to be an awesome adventure. Anything that has to do with devils and demons and the occult and, you know, libraries and books and the whole thing, like, it was just ticking all the boxes when I read the synopsis. But when I actually got into the book, for one, it is kind of like a YA sort of fantasy, so it has all of the tropes that have just been done over and over. So she's got a bad attitude, she's not a likable character. It's got the hate to love kind of relationship thing going on that's been done to death. But what really made me put this book on this list is because I'm always really irritated that when I read the synopsis of the book, it concentrates on a theme, but when you actually read the book, it concentrates a little bit more on the secondary themes, more so than the main reason that I picked up a book. So you're gonna see that a little bit in all of these books that I have on this list. So of course I was looking for, you know, a great adventure, like I said, with this devil or demon, and they're trying to get this back into the book and figure out how to do so. But it was mainly based on her relationship with her family and her friend, with this hate to love relationship thing going on, how much he hated his father. So you have this sort of teenage angst with, you know, the kids hate their parents, and there's all kinds of family drama and all of this sort of thing going on, and that's mostly what the book was concentrated on. So the main theme, that the main reason why I picked up the book, ended up kind of being a secondary theme to all of this. And that is one of my biggest things with YA right now, is that it concentrates a lot on the drama and the angst and the romance and the whiny characters, and I say it over and over again. So this book, like I said, I had such high hopes for it, and this is probably one of my biggest disappointments of this year. So not every book on this list was a huge disappointment, but when I say that, I mean I went in there with really, really high hopes and it just fell completely flat. So that's number 5 on our list. Coming in at number 4 is Campfire by Shawn Sarles, and I read this as part of kind of my summer horror marathon that I was going through, and I used to do a lot of camping as a child, so I was looking for kind of all of that nostalgia from when you're out in the wild and you're camping in tents with your family, and then we have the horror part of it that's kind of wound in here too. So again, here we follow a teenage girl, and she's camping with her family along with her best friend and a few other people that's kind of in her extended family. And when they get to the campsite, they're with a guide, and at night when they're around the campfire, they start telling legends of the area and ghost stories and that kind of thing. So again, here I was really looking forward to that aspect of hearing the ghost stories, and one of the legends that the guide tells is of that particular area, about how someone was found with antlers carved into their forehead, and they were dead. So, you know, there's occult murders going on with these wild people that live in the woods. So of course the entire family is freaked out, and kind of the next day or a few days later, this legend starts coming true, and now they're being hunted by these supposed mad people in the woods. So again, I was hoping here for a really great slasher story, but again here the book really concentrated on the bickering and infighting of this family who are supposed to be out and having a good time, and everybody is drinking too much, and then they start yelling and screaming at each other, and there's fist fights going on between adults and stuff like that. And then there's a specific part in the book that happens that didn't make sense to me whatsoever. Like, it just didn't make sense, and it really pissed me off. And then when we start getting into kind of the slasher part of the story, and people start turning up dead and everything, once we get to the end, it's kind of like they took the ending of a blockbuster movie and slammed it into the book, because again here, like, it's been done. So I was really let down by this book. It wasn't one that I would say was a huge disappointment. I didn't have really high expectations going into it, but again here, the reason why it's on this list is because I was going into the book expecting one thing, and it turned out, just like I said, just to be bickering and all of the drama. It was like a reality show, and so I was really let down by this one. So that's why it's number 4 on this list. Coming in at number 3 is actually the first book that I read in 2021, so the year did not get off to a great start. Luckily, I did read some really good books after this one, but it is Catherine House by Elisabeth Thomas. And first of all, this book has a beautiful cover. I just loved the cover of this book, and it's one of the reasons why I got it in physical copy, and it was not a cheap book. But unfortunately, the book did not live up to what I was expecting. And this is one that I had seen several times on BookTube, and I didn't really understand the hype around this book. So it revolves around this really prestigious school, and you have to basically be brilliant to get into this school. But once you're behind the gates, you can't even take your own clothing, you have no contact with the outside world, you're just immersed into this program, and it has pumped out some of the world's biggest academics. And you know, there's some spooky things going on in this school, so you guys know that I'm all about the dark academia, boarding schools, and creepy things going on, especially when, like I said, you're kind of cut off from the outside world. And I think this was the most boring and tedious book that I had read all year. And actually, I didn't even finish this book technically. I read about, I think I was about 65 to 70% in, and I couldn't do it. I could not finish this book. It was sitting on my coffee table, and every time I would look at it, I was like, I don't want to pick up that book. So basically, we're following a young girl, of course, who comes in, and she's a freshman, and she's going up through the freshman class, and you know, it's basically following her life as, you know, having to share a room with a new roommate and making friends and the whole thing. But this was the most boring and dry book I had read. Sorry, probably the second most boring and dry book that I read, because number one is probably the biggest one. But literally, like, you would read a chapter and it's like, I got up in the morning, I had a cup of tea, I went to class but I didn't take any notes, I went back to my room, I had a nap, then I went to the dining hall and there were people talking about stuff, but I didn't really get into the conversation. And literally at one point of the book, she went outside for a walk, and it literally said, like, I wish I still had the book here because I had it tabbed, but I ended up selling it. It literally said, I picked up a stick and put it down. Like, it had the most dry, tedious storyline. The conversations were not, like, the dialogue was not written well. It was just so boring. And even though it had like little tidbits of what was going on in the school, even at like 60% into the book, it still really hadn't developed anything. And if the story hasn't even started to develop and there's no hook to get you in there by 50 to 60% in the book, and it's not a series as a standalone, I was done. So this book, like I said, is probably the second most dry and boring book on this list. Coming in at number 2 is The Remaking by Macleod Chapman, and this is the second book that I read by this author this year, and this was another one that was a huge disappointment. I went into this book having really high expectations because I had enjoyed the other book so much, and it had a really great premise, but it was really dragged out. And the way the book was written, it was like, I want to go home, 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 home. So like on 5 different lines, it would have the word home written. Just flipping through, I can't. So like here at the top of the book, run, 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 run. So it had that constantly throughout the book. It was super dragged out. So I think it's almost like he had a really good premise, but maybe it should have been written as a novella instead of being dragged out to the point that it was. And the synopsis of this book sounded really good, so I'll just read it to you. It says, in the 1930s, a mother and daughter are burned at the stake as witches. Their story inspired an urban legend told around a campfire in the 50s, a 70s horror flick, a 90s meta remake, and a true crime podcast. But all this storytelling comes at a cost. So it sounds fantastic, and it just really fell flat, and I was so disappointed. I finished this book and I was just really let down with the style of writing. I didn't like the way it was written. I didn't like the way the story was developing. It did have some good points in here, like it you know, it wasn't all bad, but it just really let me down. So that's why it's on number 2 on this list. And our dishonorable mention before we get to number 1 is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Now this book I was so disgusted with that I ended up throwing it across the room when I was finished. The whole way through the book I was like, this book better have a bang up ending. I don't understand the hype over this book. I heard about this book constantly on BookTube. It's a real BookTube darling. I was really hoping for a super bang up job on the exorcism story, and I just didn't get it. I really didn't get it. So here, basically a teenage girl is claiming to be possessed, and she's starting to act really oddly. She's being treated by doctors, I believe for schizophrenia, but for a mental disorder anyway, but like none of her drugs are helping. And of course the priest gets involved and convinces the family that she is actually possessed. But at the same time, they also bring in a reality TV crew to record her and record the family, and they actually end up recording an exorcism that they do on her. And I've read so many exorcism stories that I'm just looking for a new take on exorcism. It's been done so many times that I'd like to see, you know, the kind of new ways that these usually young girls that are in these stories will act and react. I really enjoyed Baby Teeth. I really enjoyed My Best Friend's Exorcism. Both of those were on my top reads of 2020. And I found myself, first of all, rolling my eyes at it because, you know, all of the tropes for the exorcism was in here and there was kind of nothing new. It was really nothing new. And then again, because this kind of revolved around like a TV crew coming in, there was a lot of the drama and all of that was going on with this. And I really wish it had have stuck to that core story of the exorcism versus mental health, because I think they had an opportunity to really bring a mental health conversation into the story and make it the highlight, but it just didn't. And like I said, by the time I got to the end of the book, I was so frustrated. I threw it across the room and I was like, I'm done. I don't understand the hype of this book. I really don't. So that one comes in at an honorable mention. And number 1 on this list is Universal Harvester by John Darnielle. And this book had such promise. Like, when I read the synopsis, this is another one where you read the synopsis and you're expecting one thing and you get something completely different. So here we're following a young boy that's in the 90s and he's working at, like, I think the place is called Video Hut, so he's working at like a video rental place. And the patrons keep bringing back the tapes saying that there's something weird on them, and they're like new release movies, but they've been taped over with these really eerie kind of creepy images and stuff like that. And he and another girl are trying to figure out what's going on and who's doing this, and it's places around their town. So it's kind of like a Riverdale thing where like people are being recorded and stuff. And that's not at all what the book was about. Like, very little of the book had to do with that. It was something that was totally convoluted. It didn't make any sense. It was all over the place. The dialogue was dry. So this one was even worse than the other one that I was talking about. So here, like, it was literally like when this teenager would have conversations with his father, it would be like question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Like, there was no depth to the characters at all, except for one, but the depth of that character was just really weird. It didn't have anything to do with what the book was supposed to be about. And then you had this opportunity for, like, the way it was described, it was supposed to be super nostalgic from the 90s and stuff like that. It had none of that. Like, if it didn't mention that he was working at Video Hut, I wouldn't even know when this book would have taken place. So, and then all of a sudden, about 3/4 of the way through the book, they're talking about smartphones, and like there's these new characters, and I'm like, where is this coming from? Like, are they in like modern times now? Obviously it's not in the 90s. They're talking about smartphones. And then the ending was just so weird. It was the most convoluted book I had read probably ever. I really disliked this book, and I have to say that I don't think I found a single person who actually liked it. So, you know, I think I'm on the same wavelength as everybody else with this one. So that's why it made number 1 in my worst books of the year. Okay, sorry about that. Matt just got home with takeout and I wanted to eat it while it was hot. So let's continue with the video. So now I have my top 10, or actually top 11 reads of 2021, because we have one honorable mention. So coming in at number 10 was another one that I had decided to read during the summer as part of like my summer horror marathon, and that is Fat Camp by James Sabata. And this book was so surprising to me because I figured I was going to like it, but I didn't think I was going to like it as much as I did. So the reason why I love this book so much is because the slasher part of the story is really good. It's super well done, and it actually has a pretty high body count, but it's also a coming of age story, and our main character, Philip McCracken, is super overweight, and you know, his mom just constantly gives him a hard time. He's dealing with the death of his dad, and he goes off to the camp with his best friend, who immediately starts to lose weight. And you know, Philip is just feeling really down on himself. He always comes last and stuff, or just doesn't participate whatsoever because of his weight, and he's just such a relatable character. And this story has a lot of heart, as Cameron Chaney says. It really does. It has a lot of heart. I love the coming of age part of this story, and like I said, on top of that, you have that interwound with this really great slasher that has twists and turns, and you're not really sure who the killer is, and you know, high body count. And the only reason why this one was not further up on the list, and why I didn't give it a full 5 stars, was because there was one part right at the end when they were explaining everything that I was like, okay, you know, that's kind of silly. But other than that, this was just a fantastic book. I think everyone should read this book. It, you know, please pick it up this summer and give it a read if you like slasher stories and you like coming of age stories. I would love to see this book as a film. I think it would be fantastic. Number 9 is The Devil's Mistress by David Barclay, and this one is another one that really surprised me. I figured I was going to like it because it kind of took place during the witch trials, and it had this woman who was being accused of witchcraft, and you know, they were doing all kinds of horrible things to her, and it's a revenge story, so kind of along the same lines of if you've read Maggie's Grave. So she's very much like a vengeful witch, and it's one of those stories that the main character is a protagonist and an antagonist at the same time, because you're not sure if you should be cheering on the fact of what she's doing, but the revenge that she enacts is just chef's kiss. It's so good, and you really love to see horrible people get their comeuppance, and this book just hits the nail on the head with all of that. It's very, you know, female empowering, and especially after she had suffered everything that she did when she was accused of witchcraft and all of that, and she really took her anger and her vengeance and just poured it into what she was doing to other people. So this book, you know, it's a little bit graphic, but it's not over the top, so it might sound like it would be, but I think it was done just right. It was just enough gore, but not, like I said, not completely over the top, and it was very satisfying by the time you got to the end of what she was doing to everyone in the town. So this one is not one that I hear really often about on BookTube. I think it's one of those hidden gems that doesn't get enough recognition that it should. I've only heard about this book, I think, from maybe 1 or 2 other booktubers. So if you like witchy kind of revenge stories, please go out and pick this one up. I think you're really gonna like it. And number 8 is Don't Tell a Soul by Kiersten Miller. And this is one of the first books that I read in 2021. I think I probably read it in February or March. And this was such a page turner. Like, I found that when I had to put it down to go to work, or it was the end of my lunch break or whatever, I didn't want to put it down. I couldn't wait to pick it back up. It was such a great page turner, creepy mystery. And so here basically we're following a young teenage girl who goes to live with her uncle, who lives kind of in this vast sort of mansion, and his wife and I believe his daughter were killed in a mysterious fire. And now that she is living in the mansion, she's starting to see a ghost, and she thinks it might be the ghost of her cousin. So there's this whole mystery that she's trying to unravel, and you know, it's one of those small town sort of stories where she's the outsider and she comes in and everybody's really skeptical of her, and you know, everyone knows everyone sort of thing. So it's her and another guy from town that are trying to figure out this mystery, and then kind of new things start to happen that are woven into the story. So it's a really great thriller. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. It's one of those books that, and there's another thriller like this one on the list as well, that if I'm going to recommend a thriller to anyone, I would definitely recommend this one. And it's also one of those books that I don't hear a lot of other booktubers talking about it. So I would really like to see this book get more recognition. And I think I actually want to do a reread of this one. It's kind of, you know, like if you're watching a movie and you immediately want to rewind it and watch it again, it's one of those books. So I think I might actually pick this one up for a reread in 2022. And next up on the list is Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. And this is just a tiny little book, like both in height and in length, and it packs such a punch. So this is another Ouija board story gone wrong, and we end up with a young teenage Latina who is now possessed by this spirit, and she starts just acting really crazy and all of this sort of thing. But what I love about this story is the female empowerment and the feminism that's in this story, especially when you're talking about a young Latina girl who comes from a very ultra conservative family. And you know, girls are always, throughout history, they've been told that they need to be conservative and they need to subdue their feminism and, you know, all of that sort of things. And like menstruation and stuff like that. Like your moon days should be celebrated because it leads to the miracle of life, but it's always, you know, thought to be taboo. And women's urges and sexual urges are always taboo and all of that sort of thing. So there's a lot of layers in this story that if you can look past just what's happening on the surface, it's really, really great. I loved this book from cover to cover, and it's probably one that I will pick up again to do a reread at some point. I love, of course, anything that has to do with a Ouija board gone wrong and possessions and that sort of thing. And unlike in A Head Full of Ghosts, where it's kind of more along the lines of a traditional possession story, this one is completely different. So really highly recommend this book. I haven't read anything else by V. Castro, but I know that she is very much into feminist writing, so definitely going to pick up more by this author. Coming in at number 6 is No One Gets Out Alive by Adam Nevill, and this is another book that I had read early in 2021. So most of my reads that I really enjoyed are from kind of the first half of the year, and this is a chunker of a book. It's huge. I actually sold my copy, but it's humongous. I think it's 600 or 700 pages, but at no point did I ever feel bored. It sucks you into this story and it just hooks you in and you just can't get out of it. I enjoyed it from cover to cover. So this book kind of follows this girl named Stephanie who is really down on her luck, and she moves into kind of like this really rundown place, like a bed-setting kind of house, and the landlord, who's named Knacker, starts gaslighting her, and you know, she can't get her deposit back, and there's spooky crazy things going on in the house, and she thinks that girls are being killed. And the feeling of entrapment and claustrophobia that you get when you read this story is just outstanding. Like, you really, really feel for this girl, and she cannot get out of the situation that she's in. You just want to swoop in and scoop her up and get her out of this house. And so there's kind of that aspect to it. The creepy sort of things that are going on in the house, like the way that the atmosphere is built, the creepy atmosphere is outstandingly done. I was totally creeped out when I was reading it. But then the character development for especially Knacker and his cousin as well, like, they're just such disgusting, creepy people. Like, I wanted to go get a shower every time that Knacker was like getting on with his crap in this book. He's so gross. I think he's probably one of the best written antagonists I've ever read in any book. And like I said, like 600 to 700 pages of this story. At no point did I ever feel bored. I just wanted to keep reading it until it was done, and I thoroughly enjoyed every single page. And there's no reason really why this isn't higher on the list, other than there were other good books that I read this year. This is one that I would definitely recommend anyone to pick up if you're looking for, you know, creepy atmosphere, creepy people just it ticked all the boxes. It had all of the layers. It was just a fantastic book. So full 5 stars for that one. And at number 5 on the list is Take Your Turn Teddy by Hayley Newlin. And this is a book that I've talked about several times on my channel and in collaborations with other people. I enjoyed this book so much. This is another one that has a lot of layers of story and sort of, you know, mental health wound into it. The character development was amazing. So just quickly for the synopsis, we're following a young boy named Teddy, and he and his mother have to flee their home from Teddy's abusive father. And that whole situation was just heartbreaking. It was so hard to read that part of the story. I was almost crying because I just felt for this woman and this young boy, and both points of view were written really well. And so they flee to an abandoned house, I believe that's owned by the mother's family, and they move in there, and she's, you know, doing the single mom thing, keeping her head up and trying to make a home and move on with her life without Teddy's father. And so she's painting, and she's got records playing in the background and stuff like that, and Teddy befriends a shadow person that lives in the house. So the shadow person starts to win Teddy over, and they're, you know, they're like this, they're best friends. So of course, you know, there's sinister things that start happening with this shadow figure. So that's one timeline of the story. And then in the other timeline, we're following a group of 3 detectives, and I believe this takes place in the 70s. So there's 2 male detectives and 1 female detective, and they're investigating the disappearance of children within this particular town. And one of the men and the woman detective are on active duty, and they actually bring the other detective kind of out of, he's off on leave because of PTSD from things that he had seen from kind of the murders and disappearances of these children. And they bring him out because of his knowledge of what's going on. And so we have this mental health aspect that's brought into the story, and the way that PTSD is described and the way that it's portrayed is really eye-opening. It's really heartbreaking, and I think it's really well done. There was obviously a lot of research that went into this book, and it's just fantastic. All of the layers of the stories and the mental health and domestic violence and all of this kind of thing. And then you've got like this crime aspect that's wound into a horror story. So it has so many different layers, but it's all done really well. At no point are you confused or it's too much or anything like that. It's all very realistic. This seems like it could actually, you know, if you believe demons exist, this is all something that could potentially really happen. Like, it's written like something that could happen in real life. And then the ending of the story, I love the ending of this book. I thought it was wrapped up and wound up really well. It had a nice pretty little bow on it, and this is a book I think I'm going to continue to recommend people pick up. Hayley Newlin is an indie author, and she just has a real talent. So I enjoyed this book from cover to cover, and I'm going to continue to talk about it. So please go out and pick this one up and support an indie author. Number 4 on the list is the Frozen Charlotte duology. So we have Frozen Charlotte and Charlotte Says, and these books are based around these kind of demonic, murderous dolls. And if you love any stories that have to do with creepy dolls, this will really be up your alley. I thoroughly enjoyed this story. The isolation that happens here, the area where it takes place, and it's this mansion, and that used to be a school for girls, but now it's a home, and you've got these creepy dolls that are doing really high levels of like gross and graphic things to people. And I can just picture these dolls like scraping at the windows and stuff trying to get in, and the level of creepiness and the level of horror in this book, in both of the books, I thought was done really, really well. I don't think I could actually pick one to say that I liked better than the other, because I liked both of them equally. Both of them were 5 stars. So if you're into creepy dolls at all, please go pick these ones up. I almost guarantee that you won't be disappointed. So number 3 on the list is The Burning Girls by C.J. Tudor, and this is the other thriller on the list that I just could not put this book down. I thought it was written really well. I thought the mystery and the stories were wound together really, really well. So here we're following a priest. Her name is Jack, and she's a single mother. So her and her daughter move into a new town, and she's going to be the vicar at the church. And this is another small town kind of story where there's mysteries and alliances and really deep-seated hatred that's kind of an undercurrent through this entire story. And when Jack moves in, she actually gets greeted with a welcome package, which is an exorcism kit and a note that warns, but there is nothing covered up that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. And so it's really cryptic, but that's all I want to say about this. So you've got an exorcism kit, you've got a small town with all kinds of secrets, you've got religious kind of horror that's wound in here. This was just a fantastic book. This is another one I'm definitely going to be rereading in the future, and I'll definitely be picking up more books by this author. If they're anything like this one, I think I'm really, really going to enjoy them. So this was a full 5 stars for this book as well. Super engaging mystery and page turner. I really, really enjoyed it. And what I enjoyed about most, or actually I think all of the books on this list, has a minimal amount of romance. So if romance is really not your thing, these are definitely going to be books for you. And number 2 on this list is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. And this book was another one that was like, the way it was written, just, it really built up that creepy atmosphere. The main character of this book is probably one of the creepiest characters that I have read. So kind of the same thing with No One Gets Out Alive. So this is really hard to describe. So we're following this man who lives in the last house on Needless Street, and he lives with his daughter and his cat. And we're seeing things from his point of view, and he's kind of going back and forth into things that happened in his childhood and things that are happening now. And then there's another timeline where an older sister, her younger sister, had gotten kidnapped when they were kids, and now that it's years later, she's looking for answers because the case was never ever solved. So I want to leave it there. And even though I figured out the big reveal well before the end of the book, I was not disappointed. It was written really, really well. The level of atmosphere, like I said, the creep factor, the guy that's the main character in this book, I kind of picture him as Stanley Tucci's character in The Lovely Bones, kind of that really creepy dude. And so the characters were written well, the atmosphere was written really, really well, and even though, like I said, I figured out the big reveal before the end of the book, there were other reveals that came towards the end that I didn't really see coming. So this was written really, really well. It was such a fantastic, creepy story, and definitely recommend everyone pick this one up also. So before I get to my number 1 pick, our honorable mention is Kill the Babysitter by Stephanie Sparks. And the reason why I picked this little book, because I don't think it's very long, I think it's only a novella, was because this was such a great Ouija board story gone wrong. So basically you have this girl who wants to buy a car. And even though she doesn't have any training and she doesn't like kids or anything, she's like, I want to do babysitting because it pays really, really well instead of going to work at McDonald's somewhere. And so she gets hired by this mother who has these hellions for kids. And her one rule is don't let the kids play with the Ouija board. That's her only rule. So anyway, this poor teenage girl is completely in over her head, and of course all the kids want to do is play with the Ouija board, and they're being horrible to her and all of that kind of stuff. So just to get a little bit of reprieve, she's like, what harm can it do? I'll let them play with the Ouija board. The whole thing goes wrong. Kids end up being possessed, and now you have Ouija board gone wrong that has made these killer kids, and they're trying to kill the babysitter. And this is such a great story. Like I said, I love anything to do with Ouija boards. I love creepy kids, and now they're murderous creepy kids, and you're wondering how this babysitter is going to get the heck out of this situation. And there's a pretty good twist at the end that I didn't see coming whatsoever. And so this is another story that, you know, it's an indie author. It's a little novella, but it really packs a punch, and this is another one that I'm going to be rereading. So if Ouija boards and creepy kids and all of that are kind of your kettle of fish, really recommend picking up Kill the Babysitter by Stephanie Sparks. And my top pick for 2021, and I really had to wrestle with myself with these kind of top 3 or 4 books, but I ended up going with Whisper Down the Lane by Clay McLeod Chapman. And funny enough, Clay McLeod Chapman had one of my worst reads of 2021 on my list as well, with the Remaking. But with this book, you can really see how his writing has improved. He's really developed as an author. And the reason why I picked this book is because not only is it a fantastic story that kind of revolves around the Satanic Panic, but because of that, it's one of those stories that is fictional, but it can lead you down a rabbit hole into researching things that happened during the actual Satanic Panic. And a lot of the things I already had taken it on as a pet project kind of before this book came out, so I already knew a lot. But you can really see how a lot of the parallels were used in this book, and about how one tiny little thing that a child says can kind of snowball and blow up into this humongous situation. So this is kind of a dual timeline story where you have a young boy named Shawn, and he's basically told a little lie that was sort of coerced, and that lie kind of blew up into this huge situation, which is what happened during the Satanic Panic. And then you have another storyline that follows Richard, and he is a teacher at the local school, and they come in one morning and a rabbit has been sacrificed on, I think, the playground of the school, but wound in its guts is a birthday card to Richard. But Richard doesn't have a birthday. Shawn has a birthday that's coming up. So it's this, I love the way this book was written. It was very well researched with, you know, like I said, how this tiny little thing can blow out of proportion and the kind of consequences that happens from that. But I also love how the dialogue is written and how the relationships are written and all of that sort of thing. So I went with this one because, like I said, reading a book like this can kind of lead you down into a rabbit hole of learning about the Satanic Panic a little bit more for yourself. And after this book came out, I also listened to a podcast. It's a CBC podcast called Satanic Panic. So if you look it up, it's on Apple Podcasts, and it's outstanding. So if you've read this book or you're going to read it, I would say probably put it together with that podcast. And it's just like I said, you just disappear down this entire rabbit hole of the Satanic Panic. So I had to go with this one because I love fiction books that are based on something that has happened in real life or that can happen in real life. And I mean, we're really seeing this sort of stuff happen now in our history, and things that are going on in politics and in the news, that I'm like, oh my god, it's the Satanic Panic all over again. So I went with this one. Really hard choice. My top 3, I would say, are pretty much neck and neck, but I had to go with this one because it led me down that rabbit hole in learning a little bit more about something that happened in the not so distant past. So there you guys go. That is my best and worst of 2021. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Do you disagree with any of my picks? Do you agree with any of my picks? Let me know what you've read. You guys know that I love talking to you down there. But also make sure to give me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. But until next time, stay spooky, everybody. Bye.